Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with Karen, and we just finished our interview with Susan Mallery. It was fantastic, right?
Oh, yeah, she was terrific. One of the things I loved that she had mentioned was as you're writing, if you're feeling it, the reader's going to feel it. And if you don't have an emotional connection to the scene or the character, it's not going to work on the other end. And I've always thought that was true as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Yeah, and even though sometimes you feel silly if you're writing and you kind of chuckle because something's funny, or you get teary-eyed. Yes. You're like, okay, I'm making this up. Why is it making me cry?
Because it somehow feels separate from you, doesn't it?
Yeah,
even though you're the origin of it, it takes on a life of its own, which she also addressed.
Yeah, she talks about that, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, so it tends to be just a little bit on the longer side, so we're not going to take up too much time with our intro here, and we'll just let the listeners enjoy Susan Mallery.
This is a really special episode of Behind the Book. We are so excited today to have Susan Mallery with us. I almost feel foolish reading her bio because I'm certain that most people know all this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Susan Mallery is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of novels about the relationships that define women's lives: family, friendship, and romance. Library Journal says, Mallery is the master of blending emotionally believable characters in realistic situations, and readers seem to agree. 40 million copies of her books have sold worldwide. Her warm, humorous stories make the world a happier place to live. Susan grew up in California and now lives in Seattle with her husband. She's passionate about animal welfare, especially that of the ragdoll cat and adorable poodle who think of her as mom. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm going to hold up my book. I know it's a podcast, but I have to hold up my book. So for those of you who cannot see this at home, it's a beautiful cover. We all want to be there.
Oh, it absolutely is. And that's your new one, the Summer Getaway, which is a perfect beach read for people out there who are looking for something just light and wonderful and a book you can sink into. But to get back to you, Susan, we'd love to know more about your writing journey. When did you first know you wanted to be a novelist?
I didn't know until I actually took my first writing course, which was in college. I loved books. I was a huge, huge reader, but I grew up in Burbank, California. It just never crossed my mind that someone from an ordinary life could be a writer. I thought you had to be French. I thought you had to smoke. It's like, I'm never going to smoke, wear turtlenecks. I can't have I think I was hanged in a previous life. I can't wear anything around my neck. So there was absolutely no way I could ever be a writer. And I got a postcard because this was, back in the 90s before the internet. And there was an adult education center that was offering a bunch of classes: aerobics, cake decorating, how to raise bunnies. And one of the classes was how to write a romance novel. And I ignored it. And 8 weeks later, the new brochure came and it was still there. And I was really busy. I was going to college. I was newly married. I was, busy. But the third time it came, I thought, this woman's not going to teach this class forever. I better take that class. And I did. And it was 8 weeks. And by week 6, I thought, this is what I am meant to do with my life. And the humor of the story is I was studying to be an accountant. So I was in accounting. I was a couple of years from graduating. So once you reach that point in account, it's almost a technical degree. I wasn't taking any classes but accounting my entire last 2 years. I had 2 GE classes. And one of them I had to take speech, and I forget what the other one was, but I was not taking like English or fun classes. So yeah, that's when I knew. And a lot of it was, my teacher was amazing and she taught us a lot, but also she was like ordinary. And it was just, I had not known that was an acceptable background to be a writer, that you can be like everybody else. students. So that was really exciting. And that was it. I went to school. I did finish my degree. I didn't want to, but I did. And I was writing in about 4 or 5 months after I graduated. I sold my first book.
It's an amazing
So later
story.
I saw the questions you asked, what is the worst job I've ever had? This is, I mean, I've done the normal kid stuff, but this is kind of my only adult job. So I have no answer to that question. This really needs to work for me because I have absolutely no skill set that is transferable to the regular world. This is all I have.
Well, you could go back to your accounting though. Maybe that's still in there.
Oh, no. After all these years and everything's changed and I don't know how to do Excel. It is not necessary to write a novel. So I don't know how to do it. And I can barely make a table on Word. I mean, there's no way. I have no skills. These are the only skills I possess.
Luckily, the writing worked out. 40 million books later.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty happy. But yeah, it was an interesting journey.
Now, I'm curious, does the instructor, the teacher of that course, know that you went on to have such a great career?
She's passed away, but yeah, we stayed in touch. And she offered a second class, and then she did a critique group where she was the teacher. So we paid her and then we critiqued each other's work and she guided us and all of that. I was in her critique group for a couple of years. So yeah, she absolutely knows. And I remember during that class, her 7th book she wrote for Harlequin Temptation came out, and I went to what was then Walden Books. And I went there and I bought it. And I was like, I'd never met an author before, because most people, you don't meet authors, especially again, before all this internet stuff. It was very mysterious. And so I bought this book and I'm paying for it. And the clerk, I'm like, I know her. And he's like, yeah, sure you do. I said, no, I've been to her house. I've petted her dog. I've used her bathroom. I know her. So when he gave me back my change, he just sort of pushed it across. So we had no physical contact because I'm sure he was afraid. The crazy was contagious. So yeah, so no, it was really interesting. I remember, I think it was my first conference was just a blur of, oh my God, there are all these authors. But I remember my second conference and we were in a hotel and, they always have those like, I don't want to say, it's like a restaurant, but it's the open restaurant where they serve all the meals. It's not very fancy. We were getting lunch, but the escalator from the mezzanine level where registration was in the restaurant, there was just this wave of whispers. And we're all like, oh, and then it came to us, it's Linda Howard. And there coming down the escalator was Linda Howard. It's like, oh my God, it's Linda Howard. So yeah, it was fun.
That's celebrity sighting. That's always
it was it was I still remember that. And turning and looking. And she was with Catherine Coulter. And some people were, gushing about Catherine Coulter, as they should. But I will confess, I was at the time I was I still am a massive Linda Howard fan. So seeing her was just like, and I got to go to her workshop. Wow. I mean, anybody can go. It's not like I was special, but I would just remember walking in. Oh yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I got to hear Pat Conroy speak one time, and I was like that about him. I was like, oh my God. Anyway, all right. So I'm curious, on your website, you have a feature where the readers can download your book list, and I thought that was so brilliant. It's organized by year, series, and ebook availability. How did that come about, and how do you stay so organized?
I have no skills, as we've discussed. I have an amazing assistant. Her name is Janelle. She keeps my entire writing life, except for the writing part, in order. So she manages all the content on my website. She keeps it updated. I have the most amazing web person, Shelley, and I like to call her my web mistress because it just has that sort of naughty sound to it. So together they keep everything going smoothly, and we have a team of readers that we're really close to. So if we have something new and we want to test it, we've got some people who will do the beta testing for us. But no, this is all Janelle. I don't even know. There are things I don't know that are on the website. Occasionally I pop on, it's like, oh, wow, that is so cool. But no, I do the writing and all the things around it, the editing and all that kind of stuff. Anything that looks organized is probably not me.
We'll give Janelle full credit there.
Oh yeah, no, she's fabulous. She's an amazing find.
Does she have a sister who would like to be an author assistant?
She doesn't. And I have a lot of my friends are like, you're not sharing. It's like, no, I take up probably 3/4 of her time, and she works for a mystery writer, Kate Carlisle. And she probably takes the other third to quarter of her time. And so between us, we keep her she's busy. She's a busy lady. But yes, I sometimes think I should have a food taster, because there are people like, well, when you die, it's like,
Oh no.
you say it with such conviction. I'm gonna take Janelle, and it's like, okay, I'm a little nervous.
Now, to get back to your new book, The Summer Getaway, and I was lucky enough to read it prior to publication because Janelle sent me a copy.
Oh, she's good. She's good.
Yeah, and it came out March 15th, and it is just killing it. It was an instant bestseller and an Amazon editor's pick for best romance. But what I thought was interesting was the romance was only one of the relationships in the novel. And one of the reviews said, Susan Mallery is a romance author who writes books for people who don't love romances, or something like that. It was like you get so caught up in the overall story and love the love story part of it. How would you describe the genre or the story?
Well, it's funny because I've read a lot of reviews that say, the romance. And to me, the romance is so secondary to the story. The real story to me, it's a mother-daughter story. So Lillian is this older lady in the book. And so to me, that's what it's about, family drama. Oh, and Robin meets this great guy, Mason. He's a fabulous book boyfriend. If you're looking for a new book boyfriend, he's going to definitely make your top 5 because he's quite the man. So yeah, so to me, I never saw it as a romance. I understand why people are saying it doesn't bother me. I've written romance forever. So I feel very comfortable with that. I just didn't see it that way. A lot of times books will come out and I'll start to read things, reviews, or hear from readers who say things. It's like, oh, I just never thought of it that way, but you're right. Of course it is. So, but to me, it's a family drama. It's funny. It's got an amazing setting, this great house in Santa Barbara. And as a little girl, I was fascinated by the Winchester house, which, for those of you who don't know, is this big house in Central California. And the widow who owned it believed as long as she was working on the house, she would never die. So it's this crazy, huge, sprawling thing with stairways that go nowhere and all of that. And I'd always loved it. So one day it was funny. I wrote a book called The Friendship List. And part of the friendship list is a road trip with high school kids looking at colleges. So they drive down from Seattle to San Diego in a couple of days and then work their way back, stopping at colleges. And one of them was UC Santa Barbara. And it was just a little tiny, it's consequential to the story, but it was really just a couple scenes set in Santa Barbara. And I thought, because I used to live in Southern California, it's like, oh, wow, I really miss Santa Barbara. I should set a book there, which is how the setting came to be. And then as I was developing the book, I thought, oh, this could be a time I could actually do the Winchester house. So that's how the house came to be. And once I had that, then the story just sort of, I don't want to say it wrote itself, because that has never happened. And I'm waiting constantly, if I could just go in and the pages were done, it would be a very nice day. But it was fun. And once I had those two things, well, the house is really informs the story. Without the house, the story isn't going to be what it is. You need that house for that story. And so, yeah, so it sort of all came in bits and pieces. I think it's great if people want to think of it as a romance. Until they said it, I didn't think of it that way. When I write a romance, there is his conflict, her conflict, and the story arc is about them as we move through. And none of the story arcs in this are about the romance. Robin has a story arc. Harlow has a story arc, her daughter. So that's why I don't think of it as a romance, because there isn't the traditional, they meet, there's some attraction, but they both have a romantic conflict, so they can't fall in love. Mm-hmm. There's none of that. Mason's gone in, I would say, 8 to 12 seconds after he meets her. She's the one. It's just a lightning strike for him, which you cannot have in a traditional romance, because then nothing keeps them apart and the story ends in 5 pages. So because that wasn't the central focus of the book, I think the romance could play out in a different way, as it did.
There's a lot of humor too in the book, as you mentioned before, especially towards the end. It almost seemed like it snuck up on you on occasion. I loved that.
Oh, thank you. No, I would say most of my books are funny. There's the occasional book that is less humorous, but mostly I find life endlessly amusing. Just like, really? That happened? So I tend to put that it's just how I write. I've always written mostly funny. Even when I try to be serious, it doesn't usually take. So
You've written so many books. Are you ever concerned about repeating things like plot points or character names or endings? How does that work for you?
it is a constant chronic fear and concern. It is true. It is really hard. And names are just a nightmare. I've reached the point where it's a nightmare. And again, no one can see this but you two, but this is not planted. This is actually where I keep my 100,000 baby name book, because I am forever looking for names. And we have agreed that we're just at the point where I've got to let it go. Unless I want to start naming people things like table or chair, I am out of the names and I'm going to start repeating. So it just needs to not be recent. Although humorously, I wrote a category book a while ago, like maybe 15, 17 years ago, with the hero's name of Rafe Stryker, which I did exactly again in one of my Fool's Gold books. And Janelle just happened to find out. And she's like, it's the same name, not just first, but first and last. It's like, oops. So the name thing, there's nothing to be done. And then for last names, because this is also here, novel last names. Great book, because finding last names is hard. We used to look in the phone book. They don't make those anymore. I tend to go to M and R. I don't know why, but that is my instant default for last names. So I'm trying to branch out into some of the other letters. And I do reader last names as well, but that's a problem. Storylines are a huge problem. I sometimes will write a list, because when I do a book like the Summer Getaway was only based Robin and Harlow. Mason had a point of view, but not a story arc. But in a lot of my books, the book I have coming out this summer, the Boardwalk Bookshop, is 3 women. Most of my books are 3 women. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 storylines. And so each of those is its own plot. It's got its own story arc. When I do a storyline, you can pull apart the book and say, okay, so here's Robin's, here's her turning points. Here's Harlow, here's her turning points. If there's 3 of them, they each have a storyline. So in some of my books, there's 3 full storylines that are developed. So that means every book is 3. So every 3 books is 9. So now there's 9 things I can't repeat. It's really hard. Janelle and I have these conversations, okay, so how many surprise pregnancies have I done in the last 5 years? How many of this have I done? How many of that have I done? And that is the hardest thing. The hardest part isn't coming up with the idea. I have 1,000 ideas. The hardest part is the twist. So it isn't different. I got this great idea, and I've already talked about it. It's no big deal. But I have this idea about this family. It's 2 daughters, mom and dad, and the oldest daughter and mom just are always at each other's, they're just locking horns all the time. Dad is the peacemaker in the family. Well, dad and the youngest sister are killed in a car accident when the oldest daughter is like 19-ish. And rips the family apart. The daughter takes off. The surviving daughter takes off. 12 years go by. She's moved to some place I would never go, like the outdoors, on a farm. She has ducks and chickens and goats and hydroponic plants in her basement. Anyway, she decides to get pregnant because she doesn't really trust people. And everything's going swimmingly until she's put on bed rest. And she's got no one to help her. So after 12 years, mom gets a call, can you come help me? And her mother and her tiny, angry Yorkie are thrilled. Well, the Yorkie feels about the outdoors the way mom and I do. So the 3 of us are like, oh my God, it's a farm. But mom's going to be there because she wants to reconcile with her daughter. And it's like, this is going to be a great book. Really good characterization, a lot of humor with the ranch. I kind of know the love interest for both of them because the daughter has a guy who likes her and mom's going to fall for, I don't know, but some outdoorsy, hunky guy who's probably slightly inappropriately young. I don't know. But here's something I'll tell you. I wrote a book called The Stepsisters that came out, last year, which was frenemies to family. I have a book coming out next year called The Sister Effect, about 2 sisters who are not estranged, but not close, of frenemies to family. So I can't write this book because I can't keep doing frenemies to family, because at some point readers are going to roll their eyes at me and say, I can't read this again. So I send it out into the universe to find a happy home somewhere else. It just won't be with me. So it is such a problem. I envy those people who write 1 book a year. It's like, you must you can go for 1,000 years because I figure I got 1,000 book ideas. It gets really hard. It gets so complicated I always want the book to be better. I want it to be different. I want it to be something where the reader is not like, oh God, I've read this 3 times from you. I don't ever want to do that. So that's the hardest part.
That leads me to ask, how many books a year do you write?
I have been doing 3 and I've cut back to 2. So this is my last year with 3. Next year, it's going to be 2 a year. The books are getting more complicated and they take longer to put together. I used to write category romance at the beginning of my career, and that wasn't bad. And the irony is I was doing 4 or 5 a year. It was new, it was easy, I was really young. And so I had 1,000 ideas, and it didn't start to become a problem until like 60 or 70 books in. But when I got to the bigger books, because it's 3 storylines, they have to be related. They have to be interconnected. They have to impact each other. It's more complex than it used to be to put these stories together. So it just takes longer.
So what does a typical writing day look like for you? Are you an outliner?
Yes, I am a very detailed. I have a whole process. So when I start a book, I get an idea and I'll write some notes. I have an idea file and it says really interesting things like the one I talked about before, 2 women on a farm. So within this folder will be all these ideas. And I just slap it in there and there it sits. And if I never look at it or I look at it and I think, but if it starts to become interesting to me, then I will at some point I'll just think, okay, I'm going to work on that. So then I will pull it out and I will write about it until I run out. So it could be 2 pages, it could be 10 pages. And then I send it to Janelle. And then Janelle reads it and she's really good at brainstorming and she'll come back with a bunch of stuff. She could be a hairdresser. She could train monkeys. She could do this. She just sort of vomits on the page. And so then we'll go back and forth for a couple of days and then away it goes. At some point, if it crosses a certain threshold, it's like, okay, I want to write that book. Now, occasionally I'll just get an idea and it's like, that's it. I've got it. And then I know what we're doing and I'll probably write up a couple sentences to get to my editor because I just want to make sure like Robin Carr didn't just turn that book in or Rayanne Thane because they're at my publishing house and they don't want us all writing the same book. So then it waits until it's time. So when I'm getting close, I have a writer friend that I brainstorm with. We get together a couple times a year. We go to a hotel and we brainstorm. We work on each other's books for a couple days. It's very intensive. So I prep for that by expanding the story. And then by the time Chris and I are done, I know the conflicts of the point of view characters. I know the turning points in the book. I write my books based on a 3-act screenplay structure because I did grow up in Los Angeles and I took a lot of screenwriting. I never wanted to write a screenplay, but they have amazing structure. So I do if anybody's read Save the Cat, and if you haven't, you should. And if you love audio, that's a great audiobook. I've listened to the audiobook like 3 times. I own the book. I don't think I've ever opened it. I just listened to the audio. But so I do a 3-act structure and then I write a synopsis and I send that to my editor. And then it sits until it's its time. It's now in my schedule. Oh, okay, this week I'm starting a new book. So when I go to start the book, I read all my notes. Depending on how I feel about the characters, some characters, I'm sure you guys know, you just know. You know them, you know everything about them. There's no need to do work. Usually that's at least one of them. The others are sort of less fleshed out. So I have a variety of things I do. There are things I always do. I always do GMC, goal, motivation, conflict. I have my little grid that I drew by hand and I just make copies of. Because when I started, I did not know how to do this in Word. Make a table. My husband's like, I can make you a table. It's like, I'm fine making copies of my little handwritten internal and external and GMC down the side. And I just fill it in. So, and then I write a scene from each point of view. Well, I write a scene from the main point of view character for me. One of them is always the main character. And then I plot that person's entire storyline. And I'm talking scene by scene, chapter by chapter. And I have ideas. So I fill in and I just keep filling in and I know about how many scenes their storyline should be. And then I move to the next character and then I move to the next character. So then and I'll tell you, my books are about 115,000 words. My plotting will be about 30,000 words. So it's actually a little tiny first draft. And then I have these 3 storylines, and then I have to weave them so it becomes one long storyline. Nobody wants to read Mary's story and then Tammy's story and then Sharon's story. We want to read them together. And then weaving them together can take 2 hours and it can take 3 days. It just depends. Then I'm ready to really start writing. And once I start writing, I do between 60 and 75 pages a week till I'm done. But from the time I start writing the first point of view until the plotting's done is anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. And usually the last 125 pages I write in about 5 days. And I'm not pleasant. It's not that I mean to be around. It's just, I will reach a point towards the end where I'm afraid to leave the story, that if I leave it mentally, it'll be gone. So I become less and less fun because more and more of my brain is in the story. So usually I can just walk away, but it's like 90% is focused. But by the time I'm on the last writing day, I'm like 30% participating in my outside life. I try not to do, a lot of cooking that involves any knife skills because I'm not paying attention. So we'll do a lot of takeout the last 3 or 4 days, and then it's done and I'm exhausted. And so that's the process.
Has it changed at all over the years, or has that always been your process?
No, it's the basic idea. I've always been a plotter. I don't understand people who can just, they don't know. How can you not know? What if you get to page 300 and there's no ending, or they're not going to get together? I mean, then no, I refuse to waste that time. So I want to know that I've fixed it. It's much easier for me to fix something when I'm in plotting than to have to go through and do a major revision. Writers tend to like a couple of different things. Some writers really just want to do research. They don't want to write books. A lot of writers, freakishly, want to revise. That's where their joy is. And I'm like, why? Very few writers really want to write. I mean, it's true. I mean, when you think about it, I want to be doing this, but the actual writing part, a lot of writers don't enjoy. It's like, just get something on the page and then I can play with it. And that's not who I am. The part of writing I like the most is writing. I'm not super keen on research. I do it, but it does not bring me joy. And I loathe revising, which is why I try to write as clean as I can because I don't want to go back. So I've always tried to facilitate that process. And I try to make every day my best writing day, which is what all the pre-writing's about. It's just gotten more involved. I didn't used to do this. My plotting used to consist of like 3 scenes a chapter, however many chapters, depending on the length of book I was writing. And it started as like 2 sentences, and then it expanded to a 3x5 Post-it. And now it's 30,000 words. So it's evolved. And as the books have gotten more complicated, I've needed more tools to be able to hold. It's a lot to hold in your head. A book is a lot to hold in your head. And I think it takes a long time to be able to, like, I can look at an idea and say, it's a great idea, but there's no book there. I mean, it's a fun idea. It's charming. It sounds amazing. It'll be a great blurb, but there's no story. And whereas years ago, I would have gotten trapped in trying to make it work. It's like, oh, honey, that could be like one storyline or maybe half a storyline, but it is not a 120,000 word book. It's probably, it would be a fabulous novella, So the ability to see that, I think, takes time and practice and many failures.
And that's something I think a lot of readers don't realize. Even what seems to be a very straightforward, simple story has thousands of details that have to all work and interconnect. So I think that's something that you brought up that I absolutely agree with. You had mentioned Janelle is someone, your assistant, you brainstorm ideas with her. Is she also one of your first readers?
She is my first reader. She sends me back notes, and then if I agree with them, I will make her changes before I send it to my editor. So Janelle is the first reader, and then my editor. I don't do beta readers. Occasionally I'll do, if I'm not sure of an opening. There's been times when, you guys know, you got to nail the opening. You've got to nail that first page and then the second page. And sometimes it's just easy. You have the first line and it just like flows like a river. And sometimes it's just like trying to put a pillow back together with feathers everywhere. It's just, and after you've read it and gone over it, you lose perspective. At least I do. So there have been times, there's a couple of readers that I really absolutely trust, where I'll send them the first 5 pages and say, does this in any way make sense? And would you want to keep reading? And they're very honest with me, which I appreciate, because there have been times they're like, is it a garage door they're talking about? A garage door? So I need that perspective.
Well, I think I know the answer to this already because you do plus so carefully, but does the finished book usually match your initial idea for the story, or are there changes along the way?
The book goes on the journey I expect it to, because by the time I've plotted, the characters are developed, but the characters do still surprise me along the way. And my husband's always like, how can they surprise you? It's you. And it's like, no, it's not. It's if you create a real character, they're separate. And I can't explain it, but there is a feeling for me when I'm developing that we move from, it's like being a real boy. You move from being this creation to being alive. Once they're alive, they make decisions about which I have no control and may not always agree. So they sometimes go down these paths. I've had characters that really surprised me. I finished the book that's coming out next year, the hardcover next year, The Sister Effect. There's a secondary character, and he shocked me at the end of the book. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe what you did. And I was fixing dinner, and Mr. Mallery comes in, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe what Ellis did. And he's like, why are you surprised? It's like, because I didn't anticipate it. I'm just minding my own business, typing some words on the page, and he comes along and does this thing. It's like, did you want to talk about that first? Did you want to discuss it with me? No, he did not. I'm like, well, I'm very upset, as is Sloan, your partner. We're all angry. So yeah, they do surprise me, and things go in directions, but generally the story goes where I think the story is going to go.
Do you ever have any doubts about a story, either as you're writing it or after it's published?
Yes, daily. I think doubting is a natural state of being. I admire people who can be like super confident about their work. I do have a sense when there's the occasional book I finish and I think, I'm not going to do better than this. I'm going to try really, really hard, but I have peaked. Fortunately, then a couple of years later, it's like, I'm never going to do better than this. I'm going to try, so that keeps evolving. But yes, there are books I look at and people are like, oh, I love that. And it's like, oh, honey, why? Because that was a mistake from start to finish. And no, I don't name those, but there's a handful. Usually the books I don't like are because something horrible happened in my life while I was writing. The book I wrote, when my dad died, is not one of my favorite books. So it's that kind of thing. A lot of times it is tainted by something beyond itself. But yes, I think I have the book coming out this summer, the Boardwalk Bookshop. One of the characters, Bree, I love her. I love everything about it. She's the most wounded character I've ever written and one of the strongest. And I just admire everything about her. And I would love to write her over and over again, but you don't get to do that.
So do you discuss titles or covers? How much input do you have in that area?
So what happens is we get cover concepts. It might be a single concept. It might be endless. Sometimes covers just come like, well, I was just going to hold it up again, but that just seems mean-spirited on a podcast. But the cover for the summer Getaway, that was the picture they showed me. She was a 16-year-old in a bikini, and I'm like, Robin is a mature woman in her 40s, so let's, put a little more coverage. So they changed the swimsuit. There's some foam, and there seemed to be a gap in the foam, and it's like, could we add more foam? So it was like in here was just like this brown area. And so they added more foam, and we were done. Sometimes they're easy. Sometimes I have a Christmas book coming out, and the cover has gone round and round. We finally have the cover, and it's adorable. But sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's a nightmare. But I do see the cover, and sometimes it's, as I said, if you've ever done a cover or been in one of those discussions, and then they get into the once they start going down to, well, should there be foil? It's like, I'm out. This is great, but I have already wandered away mentally. Now I'm going to wander away physically. No.
I think you might have answered this question already, but perhaps there's a different answer. Is there a book that you're dying to write but haven't just yet?
I have a great idea for a Christmas book. And by going to 2 books a year, the book that got dropped was the Christmas book. So I'm not setting that free into the universe. I'm selfishly holding it inside. And it's plotted. I've taken it to plot group. And so it's like ready to go. So I may end up writing that book. And I hate to do this because one of the reasons I write quickly is I have a very short attention span. I admire people who take 3 years to write a book. I couldn't do it. Somebody would die, me, a friend, possibly Mr. Mallery, certainly not the pets. I just couldn't do it. I just don't. So I've written books piecemeal before where you write a few chapters and then you put it aside and write something else. It is my definition of hell, but it's the only way this book's going to get written. And I'm saying this in a public format. It's like, great. But it's the only way. And then if it's finished and I hand it to my publisher, they'll be like, oh, okay, well, sure. We'll take this. And then that year we'll have a third book. But yes, I'm dying to write that. I do have a book called Finding Billy Wade. And, it's a girl looking for her father. All her life, her mom, every time she does something horrible, when you're a kid, you do all kinds of stuff. Nothing really awful, but just kid stuff. I'm like, oh, you're just like your father, whom she's never met. He took off before she was born. So they have a fight the day that our heroine turns 30. And she goes to look for her father. And she has a postcard. That's all she has to start the journey to find him. And the more she learns, the more awful it is. But it's interesting. And I've made like 3 runs at that book and I just can't. I can't make the format. I can't figure out the format and I don't know. So probably never going to write that, but I think about it. I still have the file.
What would you be doing if you were not an author?
I can't honestly think of a single thing. I would do this. This is what I want to do. I can't see myself in like corporate America. I can't, no, this is all I want. This is all I want to do. And it makes me happy. I am so blessed to be able to do something I love and to have so much passion after writing 170 something books. I'm really lucky. And I know that. So I'm just going to say this. This is all I want to do. If they could just take away that whole editing thing, it would be perfect. But no.
Is that your least favorite part of the process?
I hate
editing?
editing so much. I can't tell you. It used to be back in the day, you got an actual manuscript back. So you could ignore stuff. And unless they'd kept notes, they wouldn't know. Now it's all in track changes. So you have to address it. So they know if you're ignoring them. And I never know what to do about that. It's like, should I make a comment? Are we all just going to look away? Which is my preference. But yeah, you have to actually deal with it because there it is with margin notes. Yeah, you're stuck now. It was better before.
Well, and sometimes I just wonder, are the changes going to make it better or just different? I mean, you have to kind of weigh it and make that choice.
My theory is 60% of the changes don't matter. They really don't matter. Potato, who cares? And I mostly do those because who cares? And it keeps the relationship intact. 20 to 25% probably make it better, and 15% are a disaster. So I don't do the 15%, but I've always sort of adhered to that. And obviously I'm in a better place now to say, no, I'm not going to make those changes. But when I was at the beginning of my career, I was very careful to always do the ones that didn't matter so that I had more leverage for the ones that I was willing to die for. And I can remember I got an editorial letter on a synopsis that I sent in and they had like 20 changes. And I said, I understand what you're saying. I disagree with everything you said. I will send you a different book. And it's like, oh, no, you can write the book you want. We just thought. It's like, yeah, no. So it's nicer to have the power. But even when I didn't, you've got to fight for your 10 or 15%. But you're right. Most of it is just, it's not that it's bad. It's just, sure. And then some editors are like, does she have to have red hair? It's like, why do you care what color her hair is? It's not important to anyone. If it's not significant to the book, then why do you care? And if it is significant, then yes, she does need to have red hair.
Do you have author friends? And if so, what role do they play in your life?
I do have a lot of author friends. For a while, my only friends were author friends. And I thought, you need to meet different people who are like more sane and live a more calm life emotionally. They're very important to me. They understand the crazies. They understand I can't start a book. It's like the opening line. If you don't have it, for me, it's like we cannot start until I have the opening line. I can't work around it. I have to have the opening line. So I don't have it, it's like pacing and swearing. That's all it is. And calling Janelle. So they're important. The support, the understanding, they know, they go on the journey with you. These are people who sat with me in my living room sobbing over a rejection letter and saying, one day you're going to make it. It's like, I'm never going to sell. So they're the only ones who really get, I think, the true level of crazy that is required to write a book. There is, I think, to write consistently, you cannot be, sorry, you're just not in the normal spectrum. You just can't be. You've got to feel everything and you can't turn it off. Most people cannot feel it, because if you don't feel it when you write it, the reader's not going to feel it when they read it, which is why I do not write scary stuff. I don't want to feel that. So that takes a toll. And those are the people who understand. And then you pretend to be normal around everyone else because it's important.
Is there a writing book you'd recommend for aspiring writers? You mentioned Save the Cat. Is there
Save the
anything
Cat
else that you love?
is a really great book. I think the most important thing to do as an aspiring writer is to write. And the second most important thing is to figure out what your weakness is and go study that. The reason I really can plot a book incredibly well, and I'm very strong at plotting, is when I started writing, I could not plot my way out of a wet paper bag. It was just, I didn't understand it. I could do all the feels. The feels have always been my thing. But I remember an editor said, well, I don't understand the story question. What's the story question? And I'm like, I don't understand the editor question. What are you asking me? So I took a lot of plotting workshop, which is how I ended up studying a lot of screenplay. And it is what I needed to do. So whatever your weakness is, you need to fix it, because it will continue to bite you in the butt until you fix it. And now for me, plotting is a strength. And I'm good at brainstorming. I really love it, but it was very painful to learn. Donald Moss has a couple of really good books. They're older. They're still as meaningful. I learned to plot. I went to a lecture that Donald Moss did, and this is years ago, like around 2000. And on the way home on the plane, I read a Joan Johnson book, and she used to write these potboil, just these amazing contemporary. Okay, so for those of you who are very young will know when I say this, but every chapter was like a season of Dallas. And one of the things I remember in her books, it's like the end of the chapter, there's a knock on the door and it's like, anyone but her mother, anyone. And of course, the next chapter, it's her mother. She always goes to the place. It's like, oh, not that. That's where she goes. And that's what makes her books amazing. So I found that. So between Pittsburgh and Seattle over one of the northern states, I had the most important epiphany of my writing career. And no one to share it with, alone. Well, not alone on a plane, but I was traveling by myself. And I'm like, I want to talk to somebody. So I had a layover. So I'm on a payphone because it was, 2000. And talking to a writer friend saying, oh my God, I just discovered the secret of the universe. So.
Is there something that you wish people knew about being an author? Any misconceptions you'd like to clear up?
No, I mean, people want to believe what they want to believe. It's really hard. It's lonely and it's hard. And if you don't like the writing, I mean, it's for every one of these I do, I have thousands of hours by myself, not counting the pets, thinking, typing, rewriting, brainstorming. It's a lot of work. So when they say, oh, she just changed the names, it's like, she really didn't. She really didn't. Maybe it's not your cup of tea, but I promise you, she sweated and cried and gave her all to whatever that book is. And I'm a reader too, so I get snippy when I read something I don't like, but I don't post reviews. I'm of the school, if you can't say something nice, plus this is how these people are making a living. I'm not going to do anything to make that more difficult.
So can you share what you're working on right now, or is that a secret?
It's not a secret. I am writing, I'm writing a book that will be out in almost 2 years because I'm working ahead, and I'm at the very beginning. I haven't plotted. And this one, I'm writing differently. The stories are so entwined. I don't think I can pull them apart. It's two women. It's a first wife and second wife. Mm-hmm. And I actually don't think I can pull them apart and do storylines and then braid them together. I think I'm going to have to plot this together. And I've never sat down and tried to plot as one story, 120,000 word book. There's a lot of pacing and swearing right now in my house. A lot.
Okay, well, we love to end our episodes with just some fun extra questions. So we'll just ask and whatever comes to mind, no censorship really. If
Okay.
you don't know to. What
No
is
judgment.
no judgment. What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Liver.
Me too. Who would
It's a
you want
text-
to
well,
play
it-
you in a movie? Oh,
I
okay.
think so I'm just gonna say liver, it's just the thought of it, or brains or anything like that. And anything like squishy. I'm comfortable. Anybody who's got a sense of humor is welcome to play me in a movie. It will not be an interesting movie. There'll be a lot of typing scenes. So I don't know how they're gonna make that work, but sure.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
I think time travel.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
Chocolate.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
I'd like to speak a different language.
What's your favorite smell?
Bread. Baking bread.
Oh, that's a good one.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Wow, I don't know. I turned down a job in an accounting firm to go be a writer. And I had no way of knowing if it was going to work. And we were finally going to be able to eat meat again because they were going to pay me some money and have health insurance. It was going to be great. So we went back to just the cat eating meat. I was the only one who got meat in the household. It's like mac and cheese was on sale for $1. We bought 20. Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah, I remember those days too. What's one thing you're really bad at?
I cannot play music or read music, and I've tried to learn. I just can't make the two hands work together unless how do they do that?
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Only if I could know what I know now. Otherwise, it's just repetitive. But yeah, if I could know some things, buy Intel early would be one of them. And don't sell the Apple stock when it starts to go down like 15 years ago. Hang on to that sucker because they've got some ideas. If I could know stuff, I would love to have written, there's books I would like to rewrite. There's other books I would have written. I probably would have thought about writing a Bridgerton-like thing if I'd known. If I could know, but otherwise I don't want to just go do it again. And part of me says, the thrill, the fun of life is you don't know. So I'm not sure how interesting it would be to actually know.
Yeah.
Except for the Intel thing. I think that would have
Except for that.
I would have looked good in a beach house. So yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know our listeners are going to really love this one.
Thank you.
Thanks,
This was
Susan.
great.
All right.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. They hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you loved it, tell your friends. And if you have a moment, they'd love for you to post a star rating or review. This has been Behind the Book.